So let's try something different today. Let's debate between a new car and a used car. And when most people do this very exercise, it's usually in the price-sensitive subcompact category. So with that as our parameters, I present to you Exhibit A, the 2018 Hyundai Accent, which I think can be had anywhere between $15,000 and $17,000 US dollars. So I took those numbers and plugged that into Craigslist in Los Angeles and came up with a number of Mazda 3s and Toyota Corollas with varying miles and varying equipment. But then I found some incredibly compelling options. The first is also a Hyundai, a 2015 Sonata Limited, which means it has everything in it. 40,000 miles, $15,700. Clean title. Then, you know my affinity for everything 911. I found a 996 C2, a 2001, with 100,000 miles. Not my favorite color. Does have the sunroof. Top of our range, $16,900. Then the dark horse. 1971 Ford F-350 dually with a utility bed, $15,000. Now, all kidding aside, I can completely understand the arguments against these. Well, maybe not the 911. Things like little or no warranty, buying somebody else's problems, or the risk of a flood-damaged or salvage title car. Okay, so I bring all this up to put a very clear picture of what can be had for the same price as a brand new subcompact car. And I don't really do that for you now watching this. I do this more because of Hyundai. They know they're competing against a used car more than other new cars in this segment, and that's why they've made so many changes to the 2018 Accent. With us knowing that, let's go drive the car. Okay, welcome to the stunning, I mean incredibly stunning, Valley of Fire State Park, where we're going to take a fire-breathing 130 horsepower and only 2,500 pounds, and let's get to it. Put our foot into it. It certainly ain't no 550 horsepower Cayenne Turbo, but it doesn't leave you flat-footed. You expect a subcompact Hyundai Accent to leave you flat-footed, but let's come around this turn here a bit. Little uphill, put our foot into it again. The soundtrack is not exciting, but not underpowered. A bit surprising. Like, this could work. Stop and go, even could work on a freeway. You're not going to keep up with your friends in the tuner crowd. Okay, so let's get back to that new car, used car debate, specifically the numbers that Hyundai uses to realize they compete with used cars and why they've made so many changes to this car. Hyundai has sold the Accent in the US for 24 years. Most of that time it was assembled in Korea, but now with this generation, production moves to Mexico. And in that time, they have sold 1,238,846 Accents. Not bad, especially when you consider the entire segment annually. That includes Ford, Chevy, Kia, Hyundai, Toyota, everybody is 440,000 units annually in the US. But even more interesting, that price range we talked about earlier is 10 to 20% cheaper than the average price of a used car in the US in 2016, which was $19,189, according to the folks at Edmunds. But the point that really drives it home to the bean counters at Hyundai to make the Accent more competitive is the annual sales rate. In 2016, it was about 17 million in the US. The annual sales rate, meaning transactions of used car sales in the US in 2016, 54 million. And now for something completely different, the Hoover Dam. Originally called the Boulder Dam, it sits between Arizona and Nevada, and it has a couple of purposes: power regulation, flood control, water storage, and it was originally constructed in 1931. Construction lasted for 5 years, all the way to 1936, but it was opened in 1935. The original cost, $49 million, translated to today's money, $700 million. The torsion beam, it works. It doesn't, like, it only gets fussed if I push it really far around this turn too fast, and it's like, you know what, I don't think you should make any sudden movements because it's not going to be good for you. which brings us back to the driving dynamic spectrum that you and I have talked about in many Hyundai and Kia episodes, where like Mazdas are up here and Hyundais used to be down here, but then the Elantra Sport brought it up to here. I would argue this is now like lower middle, and the only thing keeping it in the lower half is the quality of the ride. And that's where a better suspension, in the rear at least, would make this a better tool around town. The question is, would the people who buy this thing pay the extra money for it? Because it probably would be an extra, say, $1,000. And think of that as a bonus question. Would you pay the extra grand for, say, a $17,000 car for a better suspension? Wow, this is like ramming speed in this thing. Try passing in a Hyundai Accent. High speed, man, high speed stability, that's the one thing it's missing in the suspension, and probably why you'd want a little bit more buttoned up, more in the back than the front. McPherson's in the front, they're just fine. It's the rear, it gets a little wobbly at high speeds. And now, a Hyundai hybrid that is on the SEMA show floor that's been tuned by none other than the mad scientist himself, and he really is a scientist, Bisimoto. Now, you and I both know and love this guy from like GTRs and Porsche Turbos. We don't know him from like Hyundai hybrids. Well, he loves a challenge, as you probably have seen over the past many years. He even tuned his wife's Porsche to something like 700 horsepower. Anyway, I digress. This is a Hyundai Ioniq, and it's the hybrid version. And so what he's done a body kit, he's lowered it, he's changed the tires, but he's kept with like the hybrid like series of tires, the Utopia, whatever they call it. But then, what he did is he did some tunes to the engine, and then he completely changed the exhaust. So I can only imagine what a Hyundai hybrid sounds like, tuned by Bisimoto. I think we need to call him, get him on the show, and take this thing for a ride. And have him bring a GTR while we're at it. If you think back to the days, 24 years ago when they launched the Hyundai Accent, the thing was like $7 grand. Heated seats in a cheap car, I guess life's changed. This has automatic climate control in it, and this has a forward collision warning system. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, I was in stop-and-go traffic, I could basically see the car, or the car could see another car in front of me. You know what I'm talking about. And then last but not least, my new prudent test, this fails. Notice there is no water bottle here. I've had to hide it in here because it doesn't fit in this cup holder, and shockingly doesn't fit in the door panel, which the Porsche Cayenne, of all things, passes this test. So no Yoga water bottles. On that note, I'm going to drive some more in the Valley of the Fire Park because it is a wonderful place. And now, the latest from the federal government, who has certified this for 32 mpg around town and 38 on the highway. Totally respectable, but you and I need to get back to the driving dynamic spectrum, which we have discussed multiple times. And this, let's just focus on subcompact cars. There's this, and do you remember when we drove that Scion? It was a Scion back then, now it's the Toyota Yaris IA, a name that really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Well, that, if I'm looking at that spectrum, high and low, I would put the Yaris up here. This is definitely on the lower end. And it goes back to the original Hyundai way of doing things. More content. This is a fancier car. This is, I think, a better looking car. But in terms of driving, it's the Yaris that makes up for the stuff it doesn't have. Get it? And I had to think about this before pontificating to you fine folks. And it comes down to this. You and I drive sometimes fancy cars, sometimes not so fancy cars, but we drive a lot of different cars very frequently. But for the person who hadn't bought a new car for 10 years, they're going to get in this thing and say, oh my God, I hit a button and the car starts, or I can plug my phone in and it works, and there's heated seats and all sorts of toys. And really, that's why this thing kind of stands out in the market it does. So until I see you next time, bis später.